The governor does a victory lap while questions still remain about the cannabis bill. We talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the weekly program about state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on Capitol View is Kent Redfield, Professor Emeritus of University of Illinois Springfield in Political Science. Welcome, Professor.
Good to be here.
And also Jerry Nowicki, writer for Capital Illinois News. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks so much. First off, Governor of Illinois, JB Pritzker, was busy this week on a tour going around the state celebrating, some folks, were disappointed in paying higher gas taxes. He was celebrating the prospects of a capital bill as well as gambling expansion. How much should he be celebrating here in terms of going around the state, and why would he do this anyway? I mean, it just seems he won already. Why? This seems almost Ronner-esque in some ways.
Well, you have to keep reminding people, and the Rockford Casino is not news in Springfield, but it's news in Rockford, and so you want to keep out there reinforcing that you're doing you're doing good things, and it is partially counterbalancing the taxes that went online on Monday. You want you don't want a week of stories on higher gas tax and people going to Indiana to buy cigarettes. You want it to be your narrative.
Yeah. I mean, I can kind of get celebrating. Hey, we're going to have highways, we're going to have bridges. Casinos, I mean, I think that there's a lot of schools of thought about gambling in Illinois and elsewhere, but there's a school of thought that this is a sin tax, and there's already a lot of gambling that's going on in Illinois. That he would go out and say, hey, we're celebrating in a casino. Is that a good political move necessarily?
That's a difficult question because there are going to be people against it, sure, but there's a lot of jobs in construction, a lot of union jobs, a lot of high-paying jobs that are going to build these casinos, and then they're going to sustain a lot of jobs in communities that economically could definitely use them. As for it being a sin tax, I think that's probably what it is. Of course, the other end is how many people are going to gamble away too much money, and what hardship is it going to cause for people that can't afford that. But again, they could probably go anywhere, even to gas stations or bars, as we see everywhere, and find gambling terminals if they really want to gamble that bad. So
yeah, it's not for want of opportunity, and it's getting it will be even more plentiful. Certainly, we've got expecting new revenue, and we've got it dedicated to some different places, the construction primarily in terms of the capital bills. The uncertainty is, at what point do you have too much? And everybody seems to think that a casino in Chicago is a gold mine.
Right.
Casino in Rockford may or may not be good, depending on whether the Indian tribe on the other side of the Wisconsin border gets their casino built. And the people in southern Illinois I'm blanking on where the casino is supposed to be located. They think this is going to be the centerpiece of a convention and tourism and a whole bunch of things. And maybe that's a better case than saying, that Danville is going to be super successful. So there's uncertainty in there. And we have to remember when we did video poker that the estimated revenue didn't come online immediately. I mean, it took a while to build up that revenue. There's uncertainty. But right now, who's to say that this isn't all good?
Yeah. Well, I mean, apologies. I'm going to accuse you of understating things perhaps a bit. There's also, in addition to these 3 casino licenses for Rockford, Chicago, downstate, there's Racino licenses. And I've been spending time at horse racing tracks lately, and spending time. In fact, I spent an evening at the backstretch at Hawthorne, which is a harness racing track in the Chicago area this past weekend. And they're going to get 900 gaming positions. That means 900 of these video terminals, or the equivalent number of blackjack tables. I'm guessing there's going to be more slot machines and blackjack positions, but who knows? And these folks on the backstretch had been looking for this for years, and they're desperate. I mean, their purses have gone down. They've seen the number of foals decrease. They've seen what they see to be an industry that's been in distress for quite some time now. This nirvana of more slot machines and more gaming, they see it as quite truthfully their salvation. Should they? Is that a smart bet for them? I mean, I don't know. I mean, at what point are we saturated?
Well, the bill is cleverly written from the perspective of the horse racing interests, because part of getting the gaming positions is committing to an increased number of racing dates. So they're going to have to take some of this money and have more racing dates, and if they're going to have more racing dates and attract horses, they're going to have to pay bigger, they're going to have more payout. And so the horse racing industry as business and as agricultural, are looking at this as a plus. Again, we'll see, but it certainly isn't just, you can't just open or buy a horse racing, a racetrack and then make it into a casino. You got to race horses in order to.
You got to have race horses to do this, and the handle has been dropping, and so it's almost like this form of gambling, excuse me, is going to help sustain a form which perhaps isn't as popular as it should have been. The Capital Bill, beyond gambling. We've got a $35 million, I think, library that's been scheduled to be built for our University of Illinois Springfield, here in Springfield, University of Illinois. And we've also got the Armory. I think $122 million has been set aside. We've got money for railroad relocation, for realignment of the I-72, I-55 interchange. All good and wonderful things. Can we count these as done yet? I mean, particularly when it comes to stuff like the Armory. They're talking about a lot of money with no use identified. Go ahead, Jerry.
So a lot of the money for the gambling licenses, you'll have to buy a new license to be able to include sports bettings at your casino, as we haven't discussed yet. And then I think the 6 new casinos will have to buy new licenses. And then, so a lot of that upfront money will fund some of these projects. And then I think they're anticipating somewhere around 325 or 350 million annually in increased revenue from increased taxes on video gaming machines and other revenue produced by sports gambling and other forms of betting to fund bond payments, bond debt to take on these projects in the future. So the gambling revenues in the future will be the ongoing revenue to pay some of the bond debt for this. So this seems like a capital bill that you could bank on that a little bit more, but you never know. It's over a 6-year period, so you never know, like you said earlier, how that revenue is going to come in from gambling, and if we see a downturn, how many people are going to just keep their $100 in their pocket and not go to the boat.
And transportation funded by gas tax, by licensing fees, that is much more predictable. It's, you're going to be able to sell bonds more quickly. You're going to sell them at a better rate because the bond council and the bond houses are going to have confidence in the revenue streams.
And there's a lockbox too on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and in terms of the money has to go in the road fund and stay in the road fund. You're going to have to build up those funds in order to get, identify and say we've got a stable revenue stream in order to sell the bonds for the more of the public building, vertical kinds of projects. And so, I think eventually, a lot of this we're going to get. Although again, if we, 6 years from now, who knows?
Well, forget about 6 years from now. What about a year from now? If we don't pass the progressive tax, and I'm not going to call it the fair tax, let's call it the graduated tax, the progressive tax, what have you. Is there any possibility that if that doesn't come to pass, that could in some way, shape, or form affect the capital bill?
Well, it will. You can't take gas tax money and put it in the general fund.
Fair enough, but
you certainly can rewrite the gaming bill. You can rewrite lots of legislation to divert some of that money into the general fund. And so this is, again, all predicated on keeping everything afloat till we get to the graduated income tax.
Well, speaking of bond debt, we've had some conservative group this year has filed a suit claiming that the state's borrowing of money to pay off some debt is an inexcusable, unconstitutional use of state funds. Folks are kind of laughing at this. Should they be? I mean, is this have any real legs in terms of saying, hey, you can't borrow money for certain purposes, or is this something that's just trying to say, hey, we're still around, even though the Democrats control the state government?
So there were two instances that are being challenged. One of them was general obligation bonds from, I think, Blagojevich in 2003, and one of them was 2017 bonds used to pay down the bill backlog. The challenge is saying the Constitution prohibits that. You can read that passage. I think it's Article 9, Section 9 or something, and it really doesn't seem like there's anything in there that could stand up as prohibiting that. Comptroller Mendoza said this is another attempt by Rauner allies, the Illinois Policy Institute, who of course made up some of his cabinet for a while. Another attempt by Rauner allies to bankrupt the state to try to break unions. That's probably an overstatement, but as far as the lawsuit holding water, I'm not a legal scholar, but
and I don't, there does not seem to be a lot to hang your hat on, either in the language within the Constitution or the people that have looked at the proceedings of the Constitutional Convention. And the Supreme Court has been, pretty straightforward in terms of when they think they've got something specific, like the pension guarantee, not diminishing pension obligations. They'll do that. When they get something that's ambiguous, like the state should be the primary funder of education, they look at that and they say, there's nothing, we don't know what to do with that. And
we know what thou shalt pay means,
And so I think it's unlikely. The other thing is that when these bonds were sold, you have to go to bond counsel and get a legal opinion. And these are incredibly smart and incredibly cautious people generally. I would be surprised, but when you get some lawyers talking to judges, strange things can happen.
So the other thing to clarify is it's right now it's a legal filing, and they have to file it to get permission from the courts to file a lawsuit. So it's a pre-lawsuit. It's not, I guess, sort of semantics there. But
well, if you had two lawsuits to choose from to follow and really look at, would you pick the one on the bond thing that has just been filed, or would you pick the one about Mike Madigan and how he chose hand-picked folks to run against himself? There was a story in the Chicago Tribune this week based on depositions in this lawsuit that really showed, I thought, a really good picture of how things work on the inside. Foot soldiers in precincts going out and doing what they're told to do to get folks onto the ballot. And what was a hoot in this case is they were trying to get folks onto the ballot to run against the speaker. There was, I guess, perhaps the thing that a lot of folks took away from it is there's now a new word in the political nomenclature or vernacular, I think, here in Illinois, the word yank. I ain't got no yank, and that was what one of these foot soldiers said in terms of whether he had political influence or not. The story itself, I mean, the one thing that I took away from it was that you had some of these folks that are doing political work on their own time. We have no reason to believe otherwise, but they don't really know why they're doing it. They've just been told to go out and gather signatures for things they're not necessarily familiar with. And they also hold public positions. In one case, we had a gentleman who was, he was asked, what's your reading level? He says, I have a 6th grade reading level. What do you do for a living? I'm an electrician for some state entity up in the city of Chicago. Is this just more of the same? Is there anything illegal that we've seen going on here, or is this just kind of the way politics work? It's a bare knuckle sort of enterprise, and when you pull the curtain away, it's not necessarily a pretty thing to see.
Well, the demise of old style politics and patronage in Illinois, that any kind of
has been greatly exaggerated.
Greatly exaggerated.
Greatly exaggerated.
Absolutely no question. Now, there's certainly an embarrassment factor in terms of when you get these kinds of depositions. Are there potentially illegal things going on? This is a civil suit, and
sure, absolutely.
and so they're certainly if the entity that you're suing has money, then that money is at risk. At the moment, there's nothing that would necessarily rise to the level of criminal activity.
Sure,
although
correct.
certainly, as we've learned in whatever it was. The Illinois Republican Party, the Rattan decision, it is in fact unconstitutional to do hiring and firing and promoting on the basis of political affiliation. I mean, that's that certainly is illegal. So what comes of this in terms of the embarrassment factor versus any kind of financial jeopardy versus any kind of criminal, we're a long ways from that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And we should, this is tried and true in terms of when you're running for office. If you've got an opponent that appeals to a particular segment of the electorate, if you can recruit or are lucky enough to get someone with a similar profile to run, then that splits the vote.
Right.
The speaker represents a district that is heavily Hispanic. And so if you've got a Hispanic opponent, it's certainly to your advantage if you've got, instead of one Hispanic opponent, you've got two or three. And so people have been recruiting, getting candidates to run to muddy the waters. Again, this has been going on long before I came to Illinois here in 1975.
And when you say run, use that word lightly, because they get them on the ballot and then they disappear and they never circulate anything.
Sure.
And so that's what
never filing with
that's what
State
makes
Board
it-
of Elections or anything.
That's what makes it advantageous.
And,
To the speaker.
and the speaker can perhaps rightfully point out, all things being equal, well, I wouldn't have done it if Rauner hadn't found somebody to run against me. I mean, this is turnabout is fair play. I mean, that is in fact what the thought or thinking had been.
Yes.
So, anywho, moving right along here, we have Mayor Lightfoot in Chicago kind of sort of saying, I know we got a lot of pension debt up here. We really don't have a means of paying it. I know you got some issues, Governor, but could you help us out? These sorts of overtures have been reported in the past week. Should this be surprising? How important might this end up being? Because Governor Pritzker, of course, is from Chicago. He has, close alliances with Chicago politicians and the Chicago political establishment. And can he say no to the mayor? I mean, is this something that is the mayor embarking on a mission that's doomed, or could this actually go someplace where past efforts perhaps haven't succeeded?
It seems like she might be biting off a little more than she could chew. I mean, Illinois already has 130 plus billion of pension debt. I don't see how they could take on Chicago's. And as the governor said, Rockford has pension liabilities. You name a city, there's quite a few of them. Pension issues they're facing, and how could you take on Chicago's, which is, I don't know the size of it, but fairly large, without the others.
Yeah, it doesn't, do we have a huge municipal pension problem in Illinois?
Yep.
Absolutely, in terms of, and these are primarily involved police and
Police
fire.
and fire, exactly.
The people who do kind of the normal administrative work for municipalities, particularly, or local governments, are covered usually under the municipal retirement fund, which has you have to make the payments, and
IMRF is in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
Actually,
Oh, yeah. And so this is a Springfield problem. I mean, and so we're looking at some bills to at least combine downstate pension funds administratively and get a larger pool in terms of investing in more professional administration. That will help some, but areas that have healthy pension funds are not enthusiastic about joining a common pool in terms of liability with people that have very unhealthy pension funds, i.e. the city of Chicago. And so this is a very tough problem. And the state of Illinois, this is one thing that didn't get addressed. The governor was pretty aggressive in fact, having a pension holiday and paying some pension, getting bonding for pensions in order to...
And getting criticism for it, for kicking the can.
Because that would relieve pressure on the state budget, but would have made the pension situation worse. That didn't happen, but the fact that he was willing to consider it, these are unresolved issues that are part of the landmines going forward. And while, he should take a victory tour now for everything that he got. It was remarkable, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of really serious issues out there.
No, I think you're absolutely right. In the afterglow of this legislative session, you kind of wake up and you realize, geez, we're still $130 billion upside down or what have you in our pension funds. Our unpaid log of unpaid debt is $7 to $8 billion. We've expanded gambling, we've paid the gas tax, but really a ton of stuff is going to depend on what happens next year when voters go to the poll and decide whether they change the tax system. And that, to me, would appear to be, rightly or wrongly, where the real battlefield might be in terms of the conservatives and the Republicans.
Yeah, no question about it. It's not that is going to be the ball game. If you don't get the graduate income tax, you're looking at huge budget cuts because we can't sustain the spending that we're committed to, and probably, pick a number, a 1% increase in the flat tax.
Probably two.
And so it's really pick your poison. Do you want, and if it's framed, do we want to tax the rich guys or we want to tax everybody? That's a pretty powerful argument.
And Pritzker, with only recently, I can't recall the context off the top of my head, but he is dead set retirement tax. Don't even talk to me about that. And so he wants to do a graduated income tax and say tax the rich. Okay, well that's fine, but unless you're rich and retired, in which case all retirement income would go untaxed no matter how much that income is. And that, I think, to a lot of folks might be a head scratcher as to why.
Yeah, and he was similarly, he's been unenthusiastic about service taxes. The mayor of Chicago mentioned a service tax as maybe, and an author, it would not be unusual.
No mom and pops, just lawyers and white collar sorts,
And not in Illinois, but in other states, it is not uncommon for municipalities to have, some municipalities have income taxes. There'd have to be, that might or might not take a constitutional change, but the mayor of Chicago needs revenue, but I don't think the state is going to be, provide the salvation there.
Sure. Lastly, before we run out of time here, marijuana. This Forbes magazine published, I thought, an interesting story this week by the owner or proprietor of a cultivation center here in Illinois, someone who stands to benefit from the legalization of recreational marijuana. What he predicted is massive shortages beyond just the initial rollout, which has been experienced in other states. He says due to the tax, the licensure structure of the way Illinois has done it, there will be a shortage of marijuana that will linger perhaps for years because of the restrictions on new growing facilities and retail businesses. And he also says the prices will be higher than they should be. Has this gotten enough attention? I mean, folks have been, going, woohoo, we legalized marijuana, but when you get down to the brass tacks and start looking at the details, and that's what I thought was impressive about this guy. He's in the business, he knows it. What does the future hold? Have folks thinking enough about this?
I mean, they've thought about it, but there's just not enough track record there to say this is the best way that you set up and implement this program. There are lots of other things where everybody's been there, done that.
Sure.
And no, we don't know exactly where the price points need to be to not have a huge black market. We don't know what we need. We don't know what demand's going to look like or how to approach it. And now there's Oregon has been in the business for recreational marijuana for
4 years.
3 or 4 years. Apparently, they've got 2 or 3 years worth of oversupply. So maybe we.
I wonder where it's going.
Maybe they could send it to Illinois.
Well, they probably already are. I mean, that's what you do.
One of the concerns with the sponsors was that they didn't want any leaking into surrounding states, which is why they limited it. But really, I think it was the growers, the existing growers, kind of throwing around their weight and just sort of edging out any new growers in the process. There'll be craft growers in the future, smaller footprint type things, but the people I've talked to, their main concern is for the medicinal patients, their medicine, how expensive is it going to make something that they rely on for medical purposes?
Well, my understanding is that there won't be the tax on it, but you still have to get a medical marijuana card. And if you're a patient, this is $100 for a card for 1 year, and it's some degree of hassle to get. Why would you even bother with that if recreational marijuana is legal? You don't have to have a card. You just have to be 21. You wonder about that sort of thing. And the tax benefits have been downplayed, I think, by the governor. This isn't about the money, but at some point in time, it seems like it's a lot of money that's involved here.
And I mean, you have some people who are under, care of physicians that, that might have some real problem with, paying for things that they really, really need. I mean, if your back pain wasn't all that bad, we'll go. But if you need to stay under the care of a physician and you want to stay, and again, insurance companies have to decide how to deal with this.
Well, I mean, and the bill does in fact contemplate, it says, hey, we need to make sure that there's medicine first and then recreational later, but it's kind of fast and loose on how that would happen. We can talk about that point though later as we're out of time. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Capitol View.